How to computer. Step 1. Step 2. Step 3. Profit. So what if iMac was Windows? Well, you would still have an iMac and you can dual boot macOS and Windows on it because, at least for the Intel machines, you can run Windows on it. This, however, is an HP version of an iMac, and, well, I've had this for years. I've pretty much never made use of it, but now I finally have somewhat of a better idea on how to make use of this system because, as it is right now, it is in, like, pretty much severe nugget territory. Like, this is just, yeah. So let's power up the system here, and you'll see that this is basically, well, it's an HP, but it's also kind of like a laptop with a big display and built-in speakers. So it's going to stop here at the moment because date and time isn't set, but it's actually a good opportunity to tell us that it has an AMD processor, which I believe is the first time we've actually had an AMD system on the channel. Not that it's really that good of an AMD machine because it has an A6 5200 APU with Radeon, trademark, HD graphics. Now, I did some research on this back when I got the system, and the BIOS here is set to 2014, but I believe this is like a product from around maybe late 2012, if not 2013. Yeah, supposedly it's a 2 gigahertz CPU, or APU in this case, and we also have 4 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM, so that equates to about maybe 500,000 on the retail market. Maybe a bit less because it's only single channel, but we will take a look at the inside of the system itself later on. And once we boot up the system, you'll see what I mean by severe nugget territory. Now, I believe this system actually shipped with Windows 8 initially, but as you can see, it has Windows 10. And honestly, that was way more of a fast boot up than I was expecting. Now, it's probably because I powered it up again just to make sure it still works, but basically, this has a 1 terabyte drive. Now, that's a lot of storage, but keep in mind, this is 2012, 2013 hardware, and Windows 10 with a hard drive, yeah, not exactly ideal. So even though the interface itself is somewhat of a reasonable experience, if you know anything about Windows 10, you can tell that this is considered obsolete at this point. It's actually really cool to see these older versions of Windows 10, especially with the wallpaper here. But as you can imagine, it is not exactly the most quick experience with the hard drive. Now, if we go into, what was it, about this PC, and I don't even know if the keyboard is recognized. It was indeed plugged in, and that just goes to show you that, yeah, the hard drive is not really helping out the system. Now, keep in mind, I do use hard drives all the time, but when you have a newer system like this, even I know that an SSD is better optimized for Windows 10 installation. There are newer versions of this HP desktop where it's a touchscreen, but because this is an older one, we have just a normal display. But honestly, it is pretty decent. It's 1080p, and it doesn't have like a super reflective coating because, you know, it's not a touchscreen. It has the matte finish here, so yeah. But it does do a pretty good job at being an all-in-one Windows machine. Now, this interface is way different compared to the newer versions of Windows 10 that I use more often. I do actually make use of my Windows 10 machines, maybe not all the time, but I do use them. But for this, you can see that the version itself is 1511. Now, according to the Windows 10 version history, like the way they named this, the first 2 numbers, at least up until a certain point, indicates that it was the year it was released, so 2015, and because it's an older version, this tells us that it was released in November. So yeah, November of 2015, this is basically the second version of Windows 10 ever made. I know that there's been a lot of improvements with Windows 10. I haven't looked too much into the retail and other, you know, update history, but I know that this is when they moved away from the service packs, which honestly made more sense than whatever this is. Like, even just from the interface itself, you can see that this is old Windows 10. Now, I will say that when I got the system, I did a factory reset on the drive itself because it had that partition built in, but it doesn't have any of the like extra additional HP software. It must have been upgraded in the past to Windows 10 because it does have a Windows 8 sticker on the back, and of course it predates Windows 10, so unless HP was selling this whenever 10 was released, chances are most of these were probably upgraded since then. So even though the hard drive is empty, which is probably helping out in terms of performance, if you start to fill up the 1 TB drive on this, it will definitely slow down. The one advantage that this has is that older Windows 10 does work better on a real mechanical hard drive, but it is still Windows 10 after all, and I have newer, more capable Windows 10 machines, so I figured why not actually use this system and make it even better in the process by downgrading it to an older version of Windows. Now before you say, why not Hackintosh it, I did briefly look into this, but because this has the weird AMD APU system and because it's an older one, it might be possible, but at least from what I can see, it's not exactly super easy to do because, you know, it's an all-in-one system. It would have been really nice to have macOS on this, like don't get me wrong, but it's just going to be way easier and way quicker to install an older version of Windows. And besides, I have a real genuine iMac anyways. It's not like I need to install macOS on an iMac ripoff. By the way, I don't have any of the original factory accessories for this system, but the keyboard that I decided to use with it, unironically, actually matches the system really well. Now this is an Asus keyboard, and even though I did clean it up off camera, it really wasn't worth like a restoration video because it just needed a small wipe down. It was otherwise in basically brand new condition. However, as you can see, we have like a chrome strip here alongside some glossy plastics. And if you look at this, we also have a chrome strip with some glossy plastic. So this is basically, you know, apart from finding a factory original keyboard, as close as it'll be, it actually goes really well with it. Now, it is really cool to see the older versions of Windows 10, especially with this wallpaper, which is actually a photo. If you didn't know this, this is actually a photo. It's not just a CGI render or whatever. Like, this is a physical prop in the world that they took a photo of. There was still a chance, back when Microsoft was Microsoft. Of course, now it's always Microsoft. But anyways, the point is that I don't necessarily have like a dedicated Windows server yet for like older software. Now, even though I'm using my Dell Optiplex kind of like that, like I have some software archived onto it, it's nowhere near as big as my Hackintosh server. Like I have a lot more space on that system, a lot more macOS applications, and it does a great job because whenever I need something that I don't have on whatever Macintosh, all I have to do is connect up to it, transfer it over to the system, and I'm ready to go. I don't have to re-download anything because it's all locally stored on that machine. Now, I would like to have something like that for Windows, but like I said, I just don't have as much, especially for like the early versions of Windows 10. I know that there are still ways you can get newer applications onto these older versions, but there's also some like limitations. So kind of like how there were service pack limitations, like some applications needed service pack 2 or higher. It's a similar situation. Honestly, I just want to finally use this system more. In the future, we could always reinstall Windows 10 because this does actually have an activated copy of Windows 10 Home. But for the meantime, we're going to power down the system itself, and we're actually also going to swap out the 1 TB drive for something else because I don't plan on using this system as like, you know, an extra server or really anything like that. It's more or less going to be kind of like an internet terminal, so access the web, access my iTunes library. I can do that with a lot less storage, not to mention that I also need storage at the same time for my other systems, such as the Mac Pro. I also think that we'd be missing out a lot on the Windows 10 experience because we're just jumping directly into an old version of Windows. We'd be missing out on the install process, and even though I have installed newer versions of Windows, it's newer versions of Windows. This is closer to the Windows 8 and even Windows 7 era because it's the second ever release of Windows 10. And back when this was the last version of Windows you'd ever need, Microsoft also sold physical USB installers. I believe in some cases they even had DVDs. So having an official copy would also be really cool. Obviously not necessary, but it would also further enhance the Windows 10 experience. So we are going to leave this for another time, and the version of Windows that we're going to install is, of course, pretty much the best copy ever, Windows 7. Now, even though this is, of course, a desktop, it's not exactly intended to be a portable laptop, whatever. This actually has a lot in common with a laptop because it uses a laptop style power supply. But the advantage here is that we don't have a built-in battery to worry about, and we also have a solid selection of I/O. Now we have some here, but we also have some right here, and on the other side we even have an optical drive, which is exactly how we're going to install Windows 7. So of course, alongside the laptop style power supply, we have Ethernet, 4 different USB ports here. Now these 4 are USB 2 because it's not blue, but we do have USB 3 on this. You'll see it right here on the side. And we even have audio output. Interestingly enough, we also have a Kensington lock slot. So even though it does look like this is where an optical drive would go, instead you have headphone output, a microphone input, 2 USB super speed ports, basically USB 3. You even have an SD card reader and a hard drive LED indicator light. And of course, a power button, which does light up because, as you can see, it's translucent. And the only thing we have on the right is the built-in laptop-style DVD drive. Here's the laptop power supply that I've been using with this PC. Now this actually outputs 18.5 volts, 3.5 amps at 65 watts, but I don't have like the original factory power supply for this. Now this one does work, so I'm not complaining, but the specification sticker says that it can actually accept 19 volts at 4.74 amps or 19.5 volts at 4.62 amps. I guess there is a difference, but I don't really care because this works. And this is actually for an HP laptop that I have. This power supply was pretty common because HP used it from the late 2000s to the early 2010s. And the connector itself is very similar to Dell power supplies from the same era. The nice part about this system is that even though it's an all-in-one where it's not, you know, a desktop PC where you can just remove the side panel, it's actually still really easy to work with. As you can see, all the components are neatly organized, so if you want to access the hard drive, it's right here. If you want to access the DVD drive, it's right there. And best of all, the RAM is right here. Now the motherboard itself is covered up, which makes sense because it's not exactly like a standard motherboard, and it's probably also intended to keep the system cool. But this is already way more upgradable compared to some newer systems. The speakers on this do sound pretty nice, and as you can see, we have a lot of space for the drivers themselves. Now the back housing itself is mainly held on with clips. There's a total of 5 screws, 2 on this side, 2 on the other, which are identical. This one, as well as the other one on the other side, are both captive, so it means that you won't lose it. The bottom 2 are removable, but again, it's really easy to work with. And the final one is located where the stand is, so that way the stand actually has some support. But it's otherwise a pretty straightforward system to work with. And it also reminds me of the early iMac G5s, where you can just remove the back housing and have access to the entire machine. At least with this machine though, we aren't going to have those capacitor issues that the G5 is known for. Hey smokers, Knockoff Draga1 here to tell you that we have another hard drive. So the SSD budget is basically non-existent. Now I do still have a couple of free SSDs, but I also have this hard drive. It should be okay for Windows 7. And like I said, this kind of will be like an internet terminal and a way to listen to iTunes music remotely, so a drive like this should be more than enough. The best part is that this drive is in questionable condition, so not only do we have a PowerMac G4 with a failing hard drive, now we're going to have another computer with not necessarily a failing one, but I'm basically going to run this into the ground and hope that it still continues to work. So it'll literally be a gamble to see if Windows will install on this, but I will try and optimize it by making a smaller partition. Now, the nice part about this, or rather the unfortunate part, is that this is a 500 gigabyte drive, and it's also 7200 RPM. But like I said, it's questionable in terms of how long is it going to last. And the reason why I say this is because this was actually inside another Windows 7 machine which I've installed in the past, and even though it does work, over time it just started to slow down. But to be fair, it was installed on the entire drive, not like a separate partition. So the thinking here is, if I can install the entire OS on a part of the drive which is completely fine, then hopefully it should still be fine. Worst case scenario, if it doesn't work out with Windows 7, I can use this with the Power Mac and the IDE to SATA converter because, well, it doesn't care about the smart status and macOS 9 still works on a failing drive. Now, the hard drive system within the Mac Pro is excellent, but this basically makes it so you can tactically reload your hard drive. So because of that tactical reload, we also now have new DLC unlocked. Yeah, you would not believe how often I actually have to have a bandage because be careful with metal, especially inside a computer like this. How am I ever going to financially recover from this? What a disaster. Normally, I would wait for this to completely heal and then continue recording, but you know what? This happens all the time anyways. I mean, I'm sure you guys might have gotten a cut or something from a sharp metal edge. I wasn't expecting this to actually do this in the first place because I just thought it would be a funny clip, but here's my reward for that. Anyways, continuing with this is basically a brick of gold nowadays because it's a hard drive and it does appear to be a 1 terabyte drive. So let's remove it from the housing and see what we actually have. I was not expecting this at all. So it turns out we have a WD Blue 1 terabyte drive, 7200 RPM, and it's from October of 2015. So this is a bit newer than what I thought. I thought it would be from around 2012 to 2013, but it turns out this might actually be a later manufactured model of this HP. That, or it's been upgraded, but I doubt it because it doesn't seem like anyone's been inside this machine. It does appear pretty stock, and 1 terabyte was a factory option, so this is just really awesome because it's a newer drive, 1 terabyte, and it even has 64 megabytes of cache. So it's probably not solid gold, but more like solid platinum nowadays. Now let's check out the RAM. So for this, I'm not going to tactically reload the cover. We're just going to carefully remove this, and it does appear that we have laptop style RAM. I mean, it does make sense considering we have a laptop style power input. I believe this should be DDR3, and the RAM itself is ADATA. It is a 4 gigabyte stick, DDR3, 1600 megahertz. And that reminds me, I actually have some free available DDR3 1600 megahertz laptop RAM. So we might actually be able to upgrade this with even more RAM, which is something that never happens around here because I usually don't have spare RAM. I've had this RAM alongside an identical stick for as long as I've had my 2012 Mac Mini because this was the RAM inside the Mac Mini before I upgraded it to 16 gigabytes. Now it is only a 2 gigabyte stick, so having 2 of them would make 4, which is the same amount that we currently have inside the HP itself. So I could still install one of these and bring it up to 6 gigabytes. I might get faster dual channel performance if I install both of these instead of one of these and the 4 gigabyte stick, but I think I'd rather have 6 gigabytes. So it'll be awesome to finally make use of these RAM sticks again because it was a long time ago since I upgraded the Mac Mini and these have been sitting around, but at least they haven't become e-waste, so now we can use it once again. So the HP itself is now reassembled. We have all the upgrades installed, and if we power this up, we can check out the system specs. Now we do still have the factory 4 gigabyte stick, but we also have one of the additional 2 gigabyte sticks that I have, so we have a total of 6,144 megabytes of DDR3 RAM. The nice part about the RAM sticks is that they're also at the same frequency, 1600 megahertz, so we shouldn't have any issues with compatibility or, you know, one RAM stick downclocking to make sure it's compatible with the other because they're pretty much identical except for the fact that obviously one's 2 and the other one's 4 gigabytes. And as for the hard drive itself, because it's obviously a 2.5-inch drive installed in a 3.5-inch enclosure, CAD is back. I basically had some scraps of super cardboard, I cut it down to size, and it fits perfectly within the enclosure itself, so that way the hard drive itself doesn't touch the metal housing of the rest of the PC, and also so it doesn't move around. So I made sure that it is stable. I added some extra cardboard on the top of the enclosure to make sure it's not going anywhere. And I'm not really concerned about heat at all because it takes up far less space compared to a full-size drive, so if anything, it should actually be a bit more efficient. Of course, I also left the original mounting screws within the enclosure itself, so that way, instead of just leaving them off to the side and then losing them in the future, they're within the system itself. So if we ever decide to upgrade the drive again, preferably to one that is designed to fit the enclosure and is also not in questionable condition, we have them right there. And the last thing I did before closing up the system itself is I checked the CMOS battery, and it was a good thing I did because it was actually dead. So we have a new battery. I set the date and time. We should be good to go with Windows 7. So we do have a boxed copy of Windows 7, and because this has the old Microsoft logo, that's how you know it's a good copy of Windows. Now, even though the box art itself is not as visually interesting as like the Windows Vista boxes, this is still acceptable because, you know, it's a superior version of Windows. Also, it's on physical media, which makes it that much more interesting. It's crazy to think that Windows went from this to whatever Windows is nowadays. Welcome to your PC simplified. Now, this is the only physical retail copy of Windows 7 that I have. I know it's only Home Premium, but honestly, for the way that I'm going to use the system, Home Premium actually makes a lot of sense. I don't necessarily need the professional features in Windows 7 Professional, and alongside the 64-bit installer, we also have the matching 32-bit copy. The nice part about these DVDs is that they also include the Windows Anytime upgrade, but of course, we're not going to need that because we're going to install a fresh copy. And for this system, because it is a newer machine, we are going to run the 64-bit installer, but this is still really nice to have as well. And by the way, I don't think I've actually ever fully tried out these installer DVDs, but I guess it's better late than never. And because we do have the documentation, I do have the product key, so hopefully it should work. So with our basically brand new copy of Windows 7 here, you can close the optical drive, and I'm going to restart the system. Yeah, I probably could go into the boot menu, but it'll automatically detect that there's a DVD, and there it is. So we pressed the Any key, and Windows is loading files. Honestly, for an optical drive, that was really fast. And this is of course perfection because it's Windows 7, install now, setup is starting. This looks like a really weird screen resolution, but to be fair, this is of course a 1920 by 1080 panel, and we clearly don't have the graphics drivers installed yet. But now that I'm looking at this and thinking about the updates, I think the last time I installed Windows 7, the built-in update utility still worked. Fortunately, because of services like Legacy Update, we are actually able to get Windows 7 up to date again, because this is of course a retail copy. This is like a super early version of Windows 7. So Microsoft software license terms, Windows 7 Home Premium. Of course, it's going to be a custom install here because I want to repartition this. Now, I was thinking somewhere between 50 to 60 gigabytes for like the main boot drive, and then just leaving the rest as unallocated for now. I think to be on the safe side, I'll probably go with less, so that way, if something is faulty on the drive itself, it's not as big of a partition to worry about. Now, this probably doesn't make any sense, and I probably shouldn't be using this drive in the first place, but I don't care. So 51,200 megabytes should be 50 gigabytes. And let's leave Windows to install this or create the partition, and there it is. So we have a system reserved partition here, and we have 50 gigabytes for the Windows 7 install. Now, I will leave this as unallocated, like I said, because I mean, I highly doubt that I'll need the extra storage, but if I do need it for some reason, I'll just have it as a separate partition. So that way, hopefully the Windows install will continue to work just fine. This should be enough for Windows 7, iTunes, an internet browser, and maybe a couple of other small applications. And just like that, that's all the information we need right now. Your computer will restart several times during the install. Now, of course, it'll still take a while because it is still optical media, but I'll just leave this to install in the background, and we'll be back once this is done. So it took a little while, but it's actually starting to go pretty fast. And just like that, we're at the first restart. So we got a slight increase in graphics performance because the window is just slightly smaller, and we're almost done with the installation side of things, at least with this window. Obviously, we're still going to have the setup process, but honestly, for optical media, it's actually been really fast. It's going way faster than I thought. And just like that, we can now set up Windows. So Windows 7 Home Premium. So because it's an HP Pavilion, it'll be HP Pavilion. And Pavilion 23 because that's the model. Copyright 2009 Microsoft Corporation. Simpler times. Creating a password is a smart security precaution that helps protect your user account from unwanted users. And hopefully the product key actually works. If it doesn't, then I guess I'm cooked. It worked. It actually worked. Yeah, I'm excited over a product key from 2009, but like I said, I've never actually used this specific installer until now, so at least I know it works. Now, as for Windows Update, we will set this up later because, like I said, we're going to have to use Legacy Update because the built-in installer doesn't really work anymore, at least without a lot of fixes. And just like that, we now have a usable Windows 7 machine. So we do have audio, which is nice, but yeah, we really need to fix this display resolution. 800 by 600, yeah. It has it right here. I don't know why it went to this. So let's click on apply. Okay, this looks way better. Not exactly super optimized for this display, but it actually looks much nicer. We might actually be able to adjust it to this as well. See how well that works. Okay, yeah, that's not bad. Considering the display and everything, I guess we can go back into personalize, and if we go into display settings, I mean, it's not bad. It's not bad with the smaller default setting or with medium. For the sake of the video, I will leave it at medium so it's a bit easier to see. But now we need to connect this up to Ethernet. This does also have Wi-Fi, but I'm pretty sure I'll have to install the drivers first. But for the meantime, I'll just connect it up to Ethernet, get Legacy Update up and running. It might even detect the necessary drivers for this, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. So I connected Ethernet up and I'm like, why is there no connection? And that explains it. We don't have anything for Ethernet in terms of the drivers. So by connecting up the hard drive from the Windows 10 installation, I was able to copy over the Windows 10 drivers. Now, I'm not entirely sure if they'll work under Windows 7, but it's better than nothing because HP decides that once your computer is considered obsolete, you don't get to have drivers anymore, unlike Dell, which still has ancient drivers on their website. The driver situation is insane. Guess what? You don't get to have drivers anymore because they decide to remove them. Now, the drivers do still exist. You need to actually look for them, or if you're lucky enough to have restore DVDs, then it's on the DVD itself. In this case, though, I was able to find an Ethernet driver. I don't know if it actually works because we still need to install it, but I also went ahead and made a backup of the Windows 10 drivers on the Windows 10 hard drive, and at this rate, I might actually make a backup copy of that Windows 10 installation. I guess Windows 10 does still work in terms of updating drivers automatically, but it'll only be a matter of time before that stops working because natively it doesn't work within Windows 7 anymore. So hopefully this will work, and it'll be even nicer if I can get Legacy Update to install the necessary remaining drivers. So according to the information, it has a Realtek Ethernet controller. So we have a Realtek Ethernet controller driver. I will say that the system also feels really fast on Windows 7, even with this hard drive. It probably does help out that it has a smaller partition to deal with, but overall, it's been a pretty good experience so far. So it looks like it was successful, which is always a good thing. Let's go ahead and finish this. I was kind of hoping this would be a relatively fast update process, but I mean, it took a while just to get Ethernet working, but as you can see, it's working. And so with the power of Legacy Update, all we have to do is install Legacy Update, and we can bring our copy of Windows 7. In fact, that actually reminds me, we should check out about this PC. And this is Windows 7 Home Premium, copyright 2009. So yeah, this is a pretty standard copy of Windows 7 out of the box. It should hopefully bring us up to the latest service packs and the latest last official updates for 7 itself. And this will install Windows 7 Service Pack 1, Windows Servicing Stack Update, root certificates, enable Microsoft Update, which is also what we want, and in this case, it'll also activate Windows. This, of course, is an official copy of Windows 7. Now, it'll take a while, but it won't take forever as compared to, like, Windows XP, at least hopefully. Now, obviously, this is nothing too exciting because it's still Windows Update, but when you compare it to Windows 11 or even Windows 10, this is still way more interesting because, first of all, it's Aero, a user interface that just works well, and it looks great on Windows. But also, we're installing a service pack. This was when Windows updates actually made some sense, because a service pack is basically just a whole bunch of updates bundled into one convenient install package. It just made sense. Nowadays you have, like we saw with Windows 10, you have all these different versions and they only get a limited amount of support before they get discontinued, even though it's still Windows 10. It doesn't matter that this is an old copy of Windows. We can still update it completely, even though the physical media itself is ancient compared to the last versions of Windows 7. It's configuring the service pack! This is pretty cool to see. So it's legacy update, but we're still at, like, before the logon screen, so we just have the wallpaper here. So the PC restarted, and now we have, like, a different window. It's more of like a Windows XP or a Windows Classic style of interface instead of Aero. Nice! So Windows itself is now genuine, which is awesome to see. And as for Legacy Update, so far we've installed the Service Pack Update as well as some other like certificates, but I'm sure that there's still going to be a lot to install here, so we will wait for this to load. So it took a while for it to load completely, but as you can see, it was definitely worth it because we have all of these updates here, and this is basically as close as it'll possibly be to the original Windows Update utility. So we have a different variety of categories here, such as high priority, which are, well, high priority, some extras for software, Windows, security essentials, and even hardware drivers. Now, I'm actually going to start off with the hardware drivers because, as you can see, it has everything that we need to make the system completely usable again. Now, if it was like a Dell machine where I could just get the drivers off of the Dell website, then I would have installed them by now. HP is, I don't know, they just decided to do something completely different. Basically just delete everything. But at least this way I don't have to look for different drivers that may or may not work. It automatically detected everything that it needs, and I guess because it already selected the high priority ones, it will continue with those as well. So let's go ahead and install all of these. Now it says that it'll take 5 minutes for 1,385.7 megabytes. It in fact did not take 5 minutes. It took more like an hour for this to complete. And at the end here, it's telling me that it wasn't even able to install some of these updates. Now, honestly, this is probably because, you know, we're going from a fresh retail copy to 118 updates. So it probably just has to restart, apply some of the new updates, and then maybe it can actually install these. And we're probably going to have even more updates after this. Stage 1 of 3? Actually wild. I have no idea why the volume is set to such a high level, but I gotta say the speakers on this thing are pretty solid. Like, it does go pretty loud. So I went into the personalized settings here and manually selected Windows Aero because it was still selected on the default basic theme. The important thing now is that we do have transparency effects, which is awesome. And as for device manager itself, it does appear that the drivers were installed. So things for like the display adapter itself, we have the proper AMD Radeon HD 8400 driver. And the only thing we have left is a USB controller, which is probably for USB 3. Now, to be fair, there were still a lot of Windows updates to install, so I'm waiting for this to show up with updates again. And as for Internet Explorer, you can also see that this is Internet Explorer 11. So this has also been updated. And just because I also opened up the built-in Windows Update utility to see if it actually will load anything or if it's just going to show up with an error message. Well, what do you know? This is actually really cool to see. So the built-in Windows Update utility actually has some updates here. More security updates. As for the optional ones, we also have some security essentials. This actually looks very similar to what Legacy Update had. So I guess I'll wait for this to also show up with other updates, but if it is the same, then I'll try it out with this. So it seems like most of the updates were already installed, and now, well, it's Windows Update, so we just gotta wait for this to finish. Back when Windows Update itself was actually good. Just casually waiting for the updates to finish, and there's gonna be even more after this. But hey, I guess green progress bar, right? Nice! So let's go ahead and restart. Oh no! Whatever will we do? Your Windows 7 PC is out of support. As of January 14th, 2020, support for Windows 7 has come to an end. Your PC is more vulnerable to viruses and malware due to no security updates, no software updates, and of course, no tech support. The funny part about this is that it actually predates Windows 11 because Microsoft strongly recommends using Windows 10 on a new PC for the latest security features and protection against malicious software. If it's recommending Windows 10, then I guess this is actually before the real Microsoft era. I mean, the end times were near when this was released, but it's still funny to see after all this time. So anyways, don't remind me again because I was just on Windows 10. And oh no, try the new Microsoft Edge. So this also installed that one update where it brought Microsoft Edge. Now I think we should still have some updates, but let's fix that. And there we go. Of course, we also want to remove that. And there we go. Now it actually looks a bit better. Okay, so within Windows Update, it says that it is up to date. But I will double check with Legacy Update because updates and updates and updates. At this point, I'm dedicated to this. I'm all in, completely up to date. You know, maybe it would have been nice to actually have a completely up to date installer of Windows 7, but what am I talking about? This is the real experience. Plus, I get to do this so you get to watch it and not have to do it. And while I was waiting for the other updates to finish, I got the Microsoft Security Essentials app ready to go. And I also found an older version of AMD Catalyst, which I believe was actually included with these HP machines. So even though it may not be the most up-to-date version, there might be an option to update it directly, but we do have the AMD Catalyst Control Center here, and from what I saw, apparently it should also help out with USB 3, but I'm not sure about that yet. I guess we could double check within Device Manager. Okay, so it still has a USB controller issue, but we do have the Catalyst Control Center here. We can even adjust the CPU power, so I guess if you really wanted to, you could just overclock this the entire time. I thought this was also for the GPU, but I guess it's also because it's, you know, an integrated APU. Anyways, it's still nice to have this though, so we have this taken care of. I will have to try and see how to fix this, but for the most part, we are basically there. Like, we are almost completely up to date. Apart from, of course, the USB issue. Yeah, I think we know where this is going. And here they are on Legacy Update. So I think these are actually the same. Let's just go ahead and install updates on this. Honestly, the update experience isn't that bad. You just have to have a good network connection and maybe not a mechanical hard drive, but at least it does still work. So that's good. So I was looking into the chipset drivers specifically for USB 3. I found out that AMD actually has drivers still for this chipset alongside other ones, and I downloaded all the ones for Windows for the A6 5200, so that way if I do decide to upgrade to Windows 8 or Windows 10 or whatever, I just have the software on hand. Now this does mean that it basically removed the older copy of the Catalyst Control Center and it installed this. I mean, it is newer. It's version 22.6.1, which is from 2022, which is honestly a bit newer than what I thought would have been supported for an APU like this, but it's still pretty cool to see. And I guess it also tells us that we have 512 megabytes of DDR3 RAM available, so that would be using the system RAM. I guess it was another good reason as to why we upgraded the RAM. However, upon the restart here, it still isn't detected, so I'm not entirely sure what the problem is here. I'm gonna have to look into this further. So we are now a bit in the future here because I decided to deal with the rest of the software updates, driver issues, and anything else left remaining off camera. But to be honest, you basically saw the entire process. We got the drivers installed, we got most of the updates installed, there were only a couple of updates left, and as it is right now, both the built-in utility as well as legacy update say that there's no more updates. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if I refresh it someday and it says that there's even more updates, but as it is right now, it says that it's up to date. Now, there was actually a weird moment where there were like AMD drivers within Windows Update itself, so I decided to install it, but they were older versions from like 2013 or 2016, and it basically overwrote the newer drivers from 2022. But honestly, I don't really care that much about those newer drivers because, first of all, that interface doesn't really match the Windows 7 theme here. So we do have the older AMD Catalyst Control Center installed. And also, I just think that this thing right here is way more interesting to look at because right now I have the power plan set to high performance. And it basically just lets the CPU run at 2 gigahertz the entire time. Now, I don't know if it's actually doing this the entire time, but I mean, this is how you know you have real performance. So I guess the downgrade was actually a good thing in disguise, even though I had to reinstall the drivers. We do have the AMD icon here, so I guess it all worked out in the end. And another nice thing is that I actually got the USB 3 drivers to work. So we have both USB 3 speeds, and more importantly, I can actually make use of the USB 3 ports because otherwise they were not detected by Windows itself. I thought I actually had the right software because it is still called AMD Catalyst, I think it was just called AMD Catalyst drivers, but in this case it's the control center for the graphics. But in this case I found other AMD Catalyst drivers, and those were specifically for the USB 3 ports. So I guess it just depends on the chipset and what was available. But basically, we got there in the end. There are no more issues within Device Manager. We have full screen native Aero graphics acceleration. Everything looks fantastic. And my best guess as why USB 3 took a while to actually work in the first place is because this was released when USB 3 was still a relatively modern thing. I guess it makes sense that there was a separate utility for it because not all systems had USB 3 at this point. But I'm just glad that we did get everything usable in the end, and yeah, with all of this taken care of, we can start to finally use Windows 7 as intended. Of course, nothing's stopping you from using the retail release, but as I do want to use this for the internet as well as iTunes, it kinda does make sense to have it more up to date. Nice! And as for the 50 gigabyte partition, after all the updates, we still have 11.3 gigabytes free. So maybe I could have made it a 60 gigabyte partition to have some additional space, but with the way that I'm planning to use the system, it should be more than enough. And here's hoping that it's going to help the hard drive last way longer than it normally would have. So the last two things I plan on installing right now is a web browser and iTunes. Now for the web browser, we do actually have a couple of options, one of which is Firefox, another is Supermium, which I have on my XP machine, and I probably will install Supermium in the future, but just for a baseline, modern browser, this is Firefox, specifically the ESR Extended Support Release or Service Release, whatever it's called, and it's version 1.15. It actually got support for a very long time, so it should still be usable way into the future here. I guess we could try out the custom installation, so yeah, we will put it in a new Firefox folder, and yeah, we can have it on that. Now, I still will use Internet Explorer for things like Legacy Update because it looks pretty nice with it, but as for YouTube or really anything more modern, I'll use the modern sites here. Now we wait for another progress bar to finish. Thankfully, it's not as long as the installations themselves, but at least now we have Firefox. Well, what do you know? An older version of Windows is still easily able to communicate with the modern internet, play back YouTube, and in general just work fine, because it's still crazy to think that Windows 7 is now an older version of Windows, but I guess technically it is. But when you see this user interface, this is still the future of Windows, because everything else is just, well, basically a product of Microsoft. So with Firefox here, I've removed everything that we don't need, so it's just the basic web browser. I also installed H.264ify, so that way it can play back YouTube videos much easier with this hardware, and YouTube itself is able to open up just fine. There's no slowdown, we can actually play back video. And here we have the channel itself. By the way, if you've enjoyed today's video and you've enjoyed previous videos in the past, I now have a membership option on the channel itself. So if you're interested in supporting the channel directly, I would greatly appreciate it. If not, just watching these videos also helps out a ton. I appreciate everyone who watches, likes, comments, and even subscribes. But anyways, going back to video playback, and to show you how loud the speakers themselves can get, right now we are at 30. I will set it to 50. And I also got to say that cable management is honestly surprisingly pretty good. Now, I managed to organize all the cables here, so this system has a really good set of speakers, and I just can't wait to use it, because with a display like this will be a fantastic system for YouTube. And in general, playback itself is also nice and responsive. There's no slowdown. We could probably turn on the ambient mode, but this would increase like CPU usage. But it is working, and it's playing back video just fine without a slowdown. For now, I will leave it as off. It's modern YouTube on Windows 7. And to make this the ultimate iTunes streaming machine, we obviously need iTunes. Now, I'm going to install 12.2.2.25, because this is the exact version that I'm running on macOS Lion, which has my main iTunes library. Obviously, this is the 64-bit edition, and here we have Welcome to iTunes. Now, obviously, we don't have an iTunes setup page with macOS because, well, it's macOS. But here, we actually have to set it up and install it. iTunes now includes Apple Music. So yeah, even though this is older versions of iTunes, this is from 2015, which is when Apple Music really became a thing. Not like I use Apple Music in the first place, but again, the only thing I'm really focused on is compatibility. And I also actually really like this user interface of iTunes 12, at least 12.2, because it has the iOS 8 and iOS 9 appearance. So to get started installing iTunes, click Next. I guess it will be the default player, so yeah, just leave it as is. We do not want to automatically update this, because even though I don't think Windows 7 gets the latest versions of iTunes anymore, it is still like a super more up-to-date version, and I just don't want that. I want the older experience, the older interface. Now, realistically, I could probably also go with like just iTunes 12 or even iTunes 11, but again, for the sake of having the same version, it's going to be the exact same version. And because this is 2015, we still have the older MacBook designs. We have like an iPad Air 2 or something, because, or maybe it would have been an iPad Pro, because that is also an iOS 9 device. And then we even have the iPod Touch, back when the iPod Touch existed. I know it's not like the most superior version of iTunes, but if I want to use old iTunes, I have older Macs for that anyways. Import your favorite CDs with just one click. Yeah, we don't really have that much storage to work with, but the fact that I can share my iTunes library with this makes it completely worth it. So the shortcut showed up here. Congratulations! iTunes has been successfully installed on your computer. Now, there is a way where you can fix the internet services for old iTunes, at least on macOS. I'm not entirely sure how it'll work on Windows, because the last time I really used iTunes like a lot on Windows was before I really started using the Macs. So iTunes cannot connect to the iTunes Store. This is possible to fix on old macOS, but honestly, this won't really affect me for now. With this, all we have to do now is go over to the Mac Pro, power it up, enable the sharing feature for the library itself, and we should have it right here. So over here at the Mac Pro with iTunes powered up, if we go into About iTunes, you can see that this is indeed version 12.2.2.25. And if we go into Preferences, this is of course the party zone. What's nice about this is that you can also just remove the option for Apple Music entirely. But if we go into sharing, all we have to do is click on Share My Library on the local network. Now, I only have one movie within iTunes that I converted myself in a previous video. Yeah, I probably should have more movies within it by now, considering I actually do have DVDs on the Mac itself. To be fair, that does take time, but anyways, it tells us that it's on. No users are currently connected, but if we go back to the HP, we can see that this will change, and it'll be as if the iTunes library is on the HP itself. Back at iTunes within Windows, we now have a new icon next to the music library icon, and it's basically the home sharing icon, but as you can see, we can now select the party zone. Now, while home sharing itself is a valid way of sharing an iTunes library, with this, you need to use an Apple ID on whatever device you're using. And unfortunately, this is the only real main way you can share a library between a system and an older Apple TV. But of course, there are ways around it, such as AirPlay. The advantage of having an entire iTunes installation, though, is that all you have to do is share the system on the local network, and like we saw, we can easily access it without any accounts or any other restrictions because it's right here. It is exactly what I had in mind as an internet terminal and an easy way to access iTunes. And it's great with these speakers. Definitely a great way to repurpose this machine, which is otherwise considered e-waste. The other nice part about the Asus keyboard is that we also have not exactly a fully featured multimedia like arrangement, but we do still have volume controls on it. And of course I can still use spacebar to pause the music. And the best part about this is that because it is of course an HP all-in-one, we do have Wi-Fi. And in fact, I'm using it right now. So I'm able to stream the music locally instead of having to use a streaming service, because this is basically like the best of both worlds. I can still have easy access to the entire library as well as YouTube, but I'm not restricted by anything, and it makes it even better when I get to use old Windows. Can you believe that the future itself is already in the past? We had perfection. Just another reason as to why to stick with the old software, because it just works. And with that, I think we're at a good point to wrap up today's video here, because even though this HP nearly broke me with all of the Windows updates, and in some cases it physically broke me with that tactical reloading hard drive, none of this would be possible right now if it wasn't because we took a chance on it. So from e-waste to treasure, this HP is back. I can't wait to put it into service, actually use it alongside iTunes, and of course just, general web browsing, the internet, and just have a wonderful Windows 7 experience. I guess it also makes it another spare Windows 7 PC, which is always nice to have. Sure, Windows 10 was a viable option, but it's Windows 10 on an older machine with a mechanical hard drive. Yeah, I'd take Windows 7 any day. So if you enjoyed today's video, and you want to see even more awesome content like this, then consider sticking around and subscribing to the channel. If this entire Windows saga of update nonsense was entertaining, then leave this video a thumbs up. And if you want to see even more awesome content, then consider joining the channel membership, because it really does help out with making more videos like this, because I have spent literal days on this project. I'm not just talking about, an hour one day, an hour another day. No, I've been like from morning to night, non-stop. I mean, you can see the time right now. This is peak party time hours right now. So hopefully it was worth it. But anyways, that's going to be it for now. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. By the way, this is from 1994.